In this video, we will learn 10 new words through short stories. It might seem like a small step, but in 100 days, you will easily learn 1,000 words, which is a big achievement. To help you learn better, please watch each video twice. At the end of the video, try to make your own sentences using the new words you've learned. Stay with us and let's explore today's new words. The missing report and the power of analysis. I still remember the day when everything went wrong. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop screen. The report was missing. Not just any report, the report that my boss needed for a big presentation. David, where is the analysis? My boss, Mr. Carter, asked with a cold voice. I froze. Analysis? I had spent weeks working on it, comparing data, finding patterns, and making sure everything was perfect. But now it was gone. I checked my files. Nothing. I searched my emails. Still nothing. My hands started to sweat. If I couldn't find that analysis, I was in big trouble. Are you listening, David? Mr. Carter's voice snapped me back to reality. Yes, sir, I need a minute. I clicked on every folder, scanned every document. Where was it? Then, a terrible thought hit me. Had I deleted it? My stomach tightened. David, I need that analysis now. I understand, sir, I said, trying to sound calm. I took a deep breath. Think, David. Think. Analysis is about looking at details, finding patterns. If I lost the report, I needed to analyze my own actions. I replayed the past few days in my mind. When was the last time I worked on the analysis? Monday? No, Tuesday. And then, I remembered. I had saved it on my external hard drive. I quickly plugged it in. My fingers moved fast. And there it was, final analysis report. Relief washed over me. Sir, I have the analysis. I sent the file to Mr. Carter. He opened it and nodded. This is good work, David, he said. You see? Analysis isn't just about numbers. It's about thinking, finding answers, and solving problems. I smiled. That day, I learned something important. Analysis was not just a word. It was a skill, a way of thinking. And it had just saved my job.
The broken specimen and the scientist's secret. I held my breath as I walked into Dr. Harris's lab. It was my first day as his assistant, and I knew how important today was. We were preparing a rare specimen for analysis, an ancient rock that could reveal secrets about the past. Dr. Harris looked up. You're just in time, Emma. Be careful with the specimen. It's fragile. I nodded. The specimen was inside a glass case, small but valuable. My job was simple: clean it, take notes, and prepare it for testing. I reached for the tweezers and gently lifted the specimen. Dr. Harris smiled. Good. Now place it under the microscope. I moved carefully, but just as I set the specimen down, my hand slipped. Crack. The sound froze me. The specimen, the rare, ancient, one-of-a-kind specimen, was broken. Dr. Harris rushed over. What happened? His voice was sharp. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. My heart pounded. Would he fire me? He sighed and picked up the broken specimen. "This is bad," he muttered. "But maybe it's not the end." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He pointed at the microscope. "Look. The inside of the specimen is different from what we expected. This could be a discovery." I leaned in. He was right. The broken specimen showed a new pattern, something we hadn't seen before. Dr. Harris smiled. "Sometimes a mistake leads to something new." "Good work, Emma." I couldn't believe it. I had broken the specimen, but instead of failure, we had found something amazing. That day, I learned that a specimen is more than just an object. Something to study, to learn from. And sometimes, even a broken specimen can reveal something unexpected.
The Forgotten Theorem and the Final Exam. I stared at the exam paper, my hands cold with fear. The final question was about a theorem, the one I had completely forgotten. My professor, Dr. Lewis, always said, "A theorem is not just a rule, it is a key to understanding." But right now that key was missing from my mind. I scanned my notes under the desk. No use. The theorem was gone. I looked around. Everyone else was writing. Time was running out. Then I remembered something. A week ago, Dr. Lewis had challenged us. "Prove this theorem without looking at your notes," he had said. "Think, analyze, and the theorem will appear in your mind." At the time I had laughed, but now I had no choice. I closed my eyes and thought about the theorem. A theorem is a logical statement. It connects ideas. It must be proven. I took a deep breath and imagined the steps. Slowly the pieces came together. I grabbed my pen and started writing. First, the given information. Then, step by step, I built the proof. My hands moved faster, my confidence growing. And then it was there. The theorem made sense. It wasn't just a formula on paper. It was a way of thinking, a way of understanding how things work. I finished my answer just as the professor said, "Time's up." Dr. Lewis took my paper and smiled. "See? The theorem was in your mind all along." That day I learned something important. A theorem is not just a rule in math. It is a truth, a structure, a way of solving problems. And when you truly understand it, you never forget it.
Waiting for validation, finding my own. I stood in front of the computer screen, my heart pounding. My research paper was ready. All I needed now was validation. Dr. Carter, my professor, had warned me. Validation is not just a signature. It means your work is tested, reviewed, and accepted. But what if my work wasn't good enough? I clicked submit and waited. The university's validation process was strict. If my paper failed, months of hard work would mean nothing. Days passed. No response. No validation. I refreshed my email again. Still nothing. Doubt crept in. Maybe my work wasn't strong enough. Maybe I needed someone else's validation to prove I was good. Then one evening I found Dr. Carter in his office. He looked up from his desk and smiled. "Still waiting for validation, Emma?" I nodded. I don't know if my work is good until someone approves it. He leaned back in his chair. And if no one does? I hesitated. Then, maybe it wasn't good enough. Dr. Carter shook his head. Validation from others is important, but it's not everything. Do you believe in your own work? I thought for a moment. I had checked my data, rewritten my arguments, and worked harder than ever before. Yes, I do. Dr. Carter smiled. Then that's the first validation you need your own. That night I realized something. Validation isn't just an approval from others. It's knowing deep inside that what you've done is valuable. The next morning, my email finally came. My paper had passed the validation process, but I already felt validated before I even opened it.
The missing piece in my synthesis. I sat at my desk, staring at the mess of papers in front of me. My chemistry experiment had failed again. Dr. Wallace always said, synthesis is about bringing elements together to create something new. If one part is missing, the whole synthesis fails. But what was missing? I checked my notes. My calculations were correct. My ingredients were pure. The synthesis should have worked. Frustrated, I leaned back and looked at my lab partner, Olivia. She frowned at the test tube in her hand. Synthesis is tricky, she said. Every part must work together. I sighed. I know. But I don't understand what's wrong. She tapped my notebook. Maybe you're focusing too much on individual parts and not the whole synthesis. Her words stuck with me. That night, I reviewed everything again. Synthesis isn't just mixing things together. It's about balance, reaction, and timing. And then I saw it my mistake. The reaction needed heat at just the right moment. I had overlooked it. The synthesis had failed because I didn't bring everything together at the right time. The next day, I fixed the error. Slowly, the solution changed color. The synthesis was working. Dr. Wallace walked over, smiling. Perfect synthesis, Daniel. You didn't just mix chemicals. You understood how they work together. At that moment, I realized synthesis is not just in science. It's in everything. Ideas, teamwork, even life. It all depends on bringing the right elements together. The anomaly in the code. I stared at the computer screen, my fingers frozen on the keyboard. Something was wrong. My program wasn't working. I had checked the code 100 times, but an anomaly was hiding somewhere, ruining everything. Are you still stuck? Emma, my colleague, leaned over my shoulder. There's an anomaly in the data, I muttered. Everything should be working, but this anomaly is breaking the system. She squinted at the screen. An anomaly is something unusual, right? Maybe you're looking in the wrong place. She was right. An anomaly doesn't follow the rules. It's the unexpected. I took a deep breath and scanned the lines of code again. I checked the usual suspects: syntax errors, missing semicolons, misplaced brackets. Nothing. Then I noticed it. A tiny, out-of-place character buried deep in the code. This is it. I pointed at the anomaly. It was a small mistake, but it had disrupted everything. I deleted it, pressed run, and held my breath. The screen flashed, then displayed the correct output. Emma grinned. The anomaly is gone. I leaned back, relieved. The anomaly had seemed impossible to find, but once I understood what to look for, it became obvious. That night, as I walked home, I thought about it. Anomalies are everywhere, not just in code. In life, too. Strange events, unexpected results, people who don't fit in. But maybe, just like in coding, understanding them is the key to fixing things.
The Mysterious Notebook and the Secret of Taxonomy. I found the notebook in my grandfather's old library. It was covered in dust, its pages yellowed with time. When I opened it, I saw strange lists, tables, and words I didn't understand. "What is this?" I whispered to myself. My grandfather, a retired biologist, looked up from his chair. "Ah, you found my taxonomy notes." "Taxonomy," I repeated, frowning. He smiled. "It's the science of classification. Everything in nature has a place, a category. Look at this list: mammals, reptiles, birds. That's taxonomy." I flipped through the pages. There were hundreds of names divided into groups. "Taxonomy organizes things," I muttered. "Exactly," he said. "It's like putting books in a library. Without taxonomy, everything would be a mess." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about taxonomy. It wasn't just about animals. It was everywhere: plants, music, even emotions. The next day, I returned to the library. "Grandpa, can we make a taxonomy of our family?" He laughed. "That's an interesting idea. Let's try." We wrote names, created groups: parents, children, cousins. "Taxonomy helps us see connections," he said. I smiled. Now I understood. Taxonomy wasn't just about science. It was about making sense of the world.
The research paper that almost failed. I stared at my laptop screen, my heart pounding. The email had arrived. My research paper had gone through peer review. My hands trembled as I clicked to open the document. Red comments covered the page. One reviewer had written, "This argument lacks evidence." Another had noted, "Your conclusion is unclear. Consider revising." I groaned. I had worked for months on this paper, but now it seemed full of mistakes. Peer review was brutal. I called my professor. "Professor, my paper got so many corrections. It feels like they want me to rewrite everything." He chuckled. "That's the purpose of peer review, my friend. It's not to reject you, it's to improve your work." I sighed. "But they criticized everything." "That's good," he said. "It means they took it seriously. Peer review makes sure your research is solid. Without peer review, anyone could publish anything, even if it was wrong." I took a deep breath and looked at the comments again. Maybe they weren't attacking me. Maybe they were helping me. For the next 2 weeks, I worked hard, fixing my arguments, strengthening my evidence, and clarifying my conclusion. When I resubmitted, I felt nervous but hopeful. 1 month later, I received the final email. "Your paper has been accepted after peer review." I smiled. Peer review had made my work better. It was tough, but it was worth it. The experiment that changed everything. I was excited about my science project. I had spent weeks collecting data and analyzing results, and now it was time to write my final report. My experiment was about plant growth, how different amounts of water affected their height. I was sure I had discovered something important. But as I sat down to write my conclusions, I realized something. What if my results weren't correct? What if there was a mistake I hadn't noticed? That's when my professor's words echoed in my mind. Replication is the key to trust. I wasn't sure what he meant at first, but now I understood. Replication meant doing the experiment again, more than once to make sure the results were reliable. I decided to replicate my experiment. I gathered more plants, set up the same conditions, and began the process all over again. It was tough, but I was determined. As I repeated the steps, I saw something amazing. My new results were exactly the same as the first time. My plants grew just as tall, and the data matched perfectly. I smiled. This was the power of replication. It wasn't just about repeating the process, it was about confirming that my findings were real, not just a coincidence. When I submitted my paper, I made sure to mention how I had replicated the experiment to confirm my result. My professor read it and nodded. "Good work," he said. "You've shown that your findings are reliable, and that's what replication is all about." Now I understand. Replication isn't just repeating something for the sake of it, it's about proving that what you found is true, no matter how many times you test it. The day I took my first sample. It was a cool autumn morning when I first joined the research team at the local laboratory. I had always been interested in science, but this was my first real experience working on an actual project. My task was simple: collect samples from different areas of the forest to study the soil quality. I had heard the term sample many times before, but today was the day I would actually take one. As I walked through the forest, I thought about what I had learned in my classes. A sample was just a small part of something larger, a small piece that could represent the whole. For example, if you wanted to know what the forest soil was like, you didn't need to take soil from every single spot. You just needed to take a sample that would give you a good idea of the overall condition. I stopped at the first spot and dug into the ground with my small shovel. The soil felt cool and damp in my hands. I carefully collected a small amount of soil and placed it in a bag. This was my first sample. I smiled to myself, feeling proud. I knew that this small amount of soil could tell us a lot about the entire forest's health. I continued this process, taking more and more samples from different spots. Each time I took a sample, I thought about how important it was. A sample wasn't just dirt or water, it was the key to understanding the bigger picture. Each sample held valuable information, like a clue to a puzzle. I was gathering these clues to help the team understand how to improve the forest's ecosystem. By the end of the day, I had collected dozens of samples. We carefully labeled each one, knowing that they would be tested and analyzed. I felt excited as I looked at the bags of samples. They were more than just dirt or water, they were pieces of the puzzle that would reveal the true story of the forest.